Hello, welcome again. This is the third in 5 videos. This one will be talking about the third experiment that was called Riley in G major pentatonic. So this is actually based off a famous album or a famous piece of music actually that's created by Terry Riley, and that piece of music is a little bit hard to understand, but basically you have 51 or 52 parts, and each artist needs to go through each of those 51 or 52 parts in order, and however they can repeat or stay on any part for as long as they want. And so I've sort of tried to represent that using this device. So as opposed to Terry Riley, who has several musicians playing, I think I've only got about 4 or 5 by comparison. And as opposed to the 51 or 52 parts, I've only got 8 parts by comparison. But it kind of captures the basic idea that Terry Riley was doing with his in C. So instead I put it into G major pentatonic, hence the title. Okay, so first of all, we'll have a look at this first device. So basically the way that this is working is that you have one instance of the compulsion sequencer arpeggiator set to a sequencer. In this case, it's set to G major pentatonic, this is the G major pentatonic scale here. And then that has been populated here by these notes. This is in turn being fed into a scales and chord. The scales and chord is turning what note is being hit, which in this case is a G1, you can see here. The G1 is being converted into a chord, and then that chord is then propagating here, which is an arpeggio, and it's creating an arpeggio based off that chord. And so you'll notice here that this is actually changing. It's doing it automatically. It's changing through the 8 different patterns. So that's supposed to be representing the idea that, just like with Terry Riley, this is the kind of artist choosing to go to the different parts. It actually is not based on my choices. It's based off this milkshake here. So this LFO is, if you turn the rack around, it's being fed into this CV1. And then this CV1, you can see here, is selecting the pattern, going through 1 to 8. And as you can see, the CV is going very, 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 very slowly. And so that's why it's going through those patterns quite slowly. The other device, the other CV or LFO that I'm using is this chaotic signal generator. As you can see here, it's going sort of up and down in a pattern which I can't predict. I don't know if it's going to go up or down at any given moment, or how quickly or slowly it's going to do it. I generally have some controls over it, like I have this speed control, but it does whatever it wants. And so basically what's happening here is that's being fed into the back of this combinator here on CV2. It's being controlled a little bit here. It's being limited a little bit here. And then basically what's happening is the CV2 is controlling the rate of the second, or rather the first compulsion. The first compulsion is this one down here. And so what that means is that this rate, you'll notice it changes. I have no say of it, so now it's changed. Sometimes it stays on a rate for a long time, sometimes it changes quite quickly. But basically it's changing all the time. And so that's supposed to represent the idea of the artists playing Terry Riley's in C, basically choosing how long they wanted to not only stay on a certain part with the patterns, but also how long they wanted to play each part for. Okay, so what's happening is that this circle bells natural, you can see here, this is the circle bells natural, which is being triggered basically by the this whole sort of sequencer and arpeggiator combo. So it sounds like this. Okay, so you might be wondering why sometimes it seems to stop. Like for example, now it's stopped on this part here. So basically this corresponds to these here. So you can see here that it's on part 5. So on part 5, if you go over to the mode, on part 5, it pauses when this gets to the 5th one, or gets to the 5th part. Now you can see it's P6 or part 6, and so now it will stop on the 6th part of the sequence. The 6th step. And then when it gets to 7, it will stop on the 7th, etc., etc. So that again is to represent the idea of the artist stopping on particular notes to draw out that particular note. Okay, so that's basically what's going on. That's been replicated over here. You can see it's going through the patterns in the same way. It's set to the same basic, it's set to the same scale and everything. One of the main differences, or really the only difference, is that this is the sequencer is going on a G1 here, whereas this one, so in other words, it's making a G scale here, or a G chord, whereas this one is on this B2, so it's making a different chord here, which you'll hear. And so because it's in B2, it's higher, and so it's generally, this has a brighter sound. Oh, so we can hear a little bit of the choir in the background. I'll just mute that for the second. And it's following the same rule. So when it hits part 1, it stops. When this is on part 2, it will stop on the 2nd step, etc., etc. Okay, so then what's happening is we have a choir here, like you just heard earlier. So the choir is being set up very similar to what we did earlier, where on a previous experiment, where we've taken some of the gate and note information from the arpeggiator, and then we've fed that into a player tap, which is linking to another synth, which in this case is this women's choir. So basically every single time there's a note, this women's choir is being hit. But the only time when you actually really hear it is when it lingers on a note, like what it's doing right now. So the reason why that is because I've got the attack set so slow, so you can see it's hitting every single time. But you only really hear the women's choir when it settles on a particular note, like what it's doing now. Okay, now that same basic thing is happening over here on the right hand side. We also have this thing here. This thing, instead of it being the other sounds that we had, you've got this sound here with this rain-dropped. I'm not sure if that's supposed to be rain-dropped, but anyway, this rain-dropped sound, which is a kind of sine wave type sound. And everything else is the same, except that this rate is not being changed at all by the chaotic signal generator like what it is with the others. I wanted to keep the rate the same. The reason why is so that the rate for this one becomes something of an anchor, from which you can kind of understand the rest of the song. Okay, so if we play this one, you'll hear it has a kind of a sine type quality to it. So this one's actually hitting 2 notes simultaneously. It's hitting the G1 and an A3, and that's why sometimes you have a low note, like what you can hear now, and sometimes it has a high note. Okay, finally we've got this other choir, which is extremely similar to the other one, where through this player tap, information from this particular device is, or this particular arpeggiator is being fed into this choir here. And so you basically have 2 different choirs here that are sort of playing off one another. This one here is a little bit loud deliberately, because I wanted this one to sort of be a bit more in the background, and then this one here to be a bit more of the main one. And that's really the way that whole thing works. It's quite complex in some ways. Okay, so as for the visualizer, the 4 ones at the bottom here are the overall audio. The 3 at the top here are used for different sounds. So down at the bottom here, I believe you have that raindroped sine wave type sound. Then these 2 here are being used for the 2 different instances of this here, the circle bells, the high one and the low one. Okay, and that's it for this third of the generative music experiments, the Riley in G major pentatonic. Thank you for listening.